Somewhere far away beneath the warm, gentle waters of the Pacific Ocean, a dark, almost icy world is hidden, so dangerous and inhospitable that humanity knows about it. Well, let's be honest, almost nothing. For a long time it was believed that life at these depths was simply impossible. The conditions are such that even the simplest cells that make up living organisms would immediately be destroyed. Bones and shells dissolved. Everything we call the basics of life simply stops working here. But in 1960, something happened that turned our understanding of the depths upside down. For the first time, a form of life was observed at the very bottom. Yes, you heard that right. And from that moment on, things became even more interesting. It turned out that this life did not just wander here by accident. It is local, unique, adapted to these extreme conditions so thoroughly that it would not survive anywhere else on the planet. Our understanding of this mysterious realm mostly comes from rare finds, either fragments brought up from the depths by autonomous probes, or the catch accidentally snagged by fishermen working these waters. Sometimes, strange creatures, dwellers of the deep ocean, wash up on shore, and they look as if they came from another planet. Without their accustomed pressure, they lose their form, deform, turn into shapeless goo. We cannot even always guess what they looked like in life, or how they could live at all. The ocean floor is the last true blank spot on the map of Earth, a territory that has not yet yielded to the explorers, but that is a matter of time. Today, we will head into the very heart of the unknown. We will descend into the deepest trench on our planet, the Mariana. Our journey into the abyss does not begin with a submarine, but with a sailing ship. Yes, it all began a century and a half ago, when the British vessel HMS Challenger was nearing the end of a 4-year circumnavigation, the first expedition in history to map the ocean floor. On board, a team of scientists, sailors, and kilometer after kilometer, heavy labor. They lowered a lead weight into the water to measure the depth, and then hauled hundreds of meters of soaked icy rope back onto the deck by hand. All this under the blazing sun of the tropics or in the icy waters of the poles. The picture that emerged was not very inspiring. Mud, silt, and emptiness. That is what they found at depths of 3 to 4 kilometers. Everything was going according to plan until something unexpected happened. That day, in the open ocean, roughly 2,000 kilometers east of the Philippines, the team was taking another routine depth measurement. It seemed like a mundane procedure, but this time, the weight did not touch bottom at 3 kilometers, nor at 4, nor even at 5. The rope was paid out deeper and deeper, and the weight kept sinking. And then surely someone on board said, "Guys, either the end of the world is under the ship, or we found something truly deep." One can only imagine how it felt, standing on a wooden deck and sensing a black abyss opening beneath the ship. In those days, sailors were superstitious people. What if below us lies the lair of a sea monster, ready to wrap its tentacles around the entire ship and drag it into the abyss? Today, that seems like a fairy tale. But in the 19th century, such fears were quite real. In the end, the weight reached the bottom. At a depth of more than 8 kilometers, they had found what would later be called the Mariana Trench. And if they had shifted just a couple of kilometers farther west, they would have been above the deepest point of the Earth's crust, Challenger Deep. To give you a sense of scale, if you dropped Everest into this trench, it would vanish completely into the darkness, and there would still be 2 kilometers left to the bottom. Nummer eins. The Mariana Trench is not just a deep hole in the ocean floor. It is a true tectonic monster, It stretches for 2,500 kilometers like a giant smile of nature arced along the floor of the Pacific Ocean, and its width is almost 70 kilometers. The trench begins about 2,000 kilometers south of Japan. At first it bends to the southeast, and then it abruptly turns west, heading toward the Philippines. On one side of this underwater gorge rise sheer cliffs of igneous rock. On the other, the seafloor gently falls away into a void, stretching 12,000 kilometers all the way to Mexico. And yes, that lifeless plain is practically flat. Nature, it seems, decided that sometimes scale matters more than decoration. It is hard to grasp how vast this all is. Take, for example, Challenger Deep. Just a small corner of the entire Mariana Trench. It could fit as many as 5 Grand Canyons inside it. 5. And the Grand Canyon is itself a symbol of grandeur. And you know, if you wanted to hide all your digital secrets somewhere truly deep, well, here you go. The perfect place, though you probably do not have a submarine. But back to geology. The Mariana Trench is just one of many cracks in the Earth's crust that, like scars, girdle the Pacific Ocean. These scars do not just lie there. They move constantly, crunch, fracture, collide, and create earthquakes. Fully 90% of all earthquakes on Earth occur right here, along this grand fracture, 40,000 kilometers long. And you know, these cracks are not lonely. They have flashy neighbors, a ring of volcanoes called the Pacific Ring of Fire. It is like a necklace of lava laid around the ocean's perimeter. Understanding why everything is so active here helps us unlock secrets of the planet's past. How the relief changed, why the continents ended up where they are now, and how deep faults influenced this global puzzle. But to really understand what gave birth to such a monstrous trench, it is worth first looking to the other side of the planet, to the Atlantic Ocean. Many people think that continents are just the dry parts of Earth, and oceans are everything underwater. Not quite. These are entirely different geological entities. It is all the crust of our planet. But the crust comes in 2 types: old and thick, continental, and young and thin, oceanic. Both literally float, yes, literally, on a sphere of molten rock that we call magma. Picture an iceberg drifting in water. Now replace the water with molten lava, the iceberg with a continent, and you get an image of a modern continent. Between these icebergs lies a thin layer of oceanic crust, relatively young and rather brittle. You can compare it to an apple peel, thin, yet covering everything. Continents are the veterans of geology. They are billions of years old. Oceanic crust is a newborn. It is only millions. But it is precisely this crust that drives the whole dance of tectonic plates, shuffling the land back and forth like a gigantic pinball table. And what makes all this move are heat flows in Earth's interior, like invisible motors beneath our feet. And now the most interesting part. All the continents were once gathered into a single supercontinent, Pangaea. But about 200 million years ago, that party ended, and everything began to drift apart. In the Atlantic Ocean, for example, the Americas are gradually moving away from Europe and Africa. And between them, in the center, new crust is growing, right in the middle of the ocean. If the Americas, like a sulky teenager, are sailing farther and farther from Europe and Africa, it is logical to assume that on the other side they are drawing closer to someone. Correct. They are rushing toward Asia and Australia. That means the Atlantic Ocean is swelling, while the Pacific is gradually contracting. Yes, oceans also go through age-related changes. And while a new oceanic floor is being born in the Atlantic, something opposite is happening in the Pacific. There the crust is being destroyed. How? Imagine a giant conveyor belt along which a lithospheric plate, the Pacific plate, moves. It drifts outward unhurriedly, like the belt of a treadmill, but geological. And then, oops, and it runs into a shore. What then? Then this belt begins to dive beneath the continent. Not of its own free will, its neighbor plate forces it down. This process is called subduction. And no, it is not a spell from Harry Potter. It is the real mechanism of geological self-destruction. And there you have the Mariana Trench, in the literal sense a grave for aging oceanic crust. The plate dives beneath Asia, returning to where it was once born, into molten magma, the cycle of geology in nature. What happens along the edges of the Pacific is the largest recycling operation on the planet. Few factories can compare in volume. Here the ocean floor is literally twisted, bent, broken, and melted, swallowed by Earth's searing interior. It is along these subduction lines that we find not only the deepest trenches, but also the most dangerous volcanoes. As soon as part of the ocean floor begins to sink and melt, part of the molten rock bursts upward in the form of eruptions. That is why an entire chain of volcanoes lies along this zone. This is the Ring of Fire. And believe me, it is not the kind you wear on a finger. Here, where plates meet, wonders are born. For example, huge mud volcanoes that vent hydrogen into the water. One of them reaches 50 kilometers in diameter, no mere bubble on porridge, or a volcano that spews almost pure carbon dioxide, which, because of the pressure, escapes not as a gas, but in the form of a liquid. Fantastic. And the cherry on this geological cake, a volcano with a crater full of molten sulfur. You can find such a thing elsewhere, only on a moon of Jupiter. Yep, we have more in common with Jupiter than it seems. But today, we are not talking about volcanoes. Today, our goal is to go down to where even a shaft of light rarely reaches. We will head into the very abyss of the Mariana Trench and at the end, reach Challenger Deep, the deepest of the known points on Earth's surface. It might seem that the trench is some sort of anomaly, as if such a deep place cannot exist on the planet. It must be an exception. But no. It turns out there are other trenches around the Pacific with no less impressive depths. Here is an example. Nearby lies the Tonga Trench, depth 10,800 meters, almost like the Mariana. Another one, the Philippine Trench, 10,540 meters. Do you catch the idea? In those places, Earth seems to be testing gravity's limits, as if saying, and if we go a little deeper, will you hold? Moreover, even Challenger Deep is a temporary phenomenon. Yes, not eternal. After a while, this entire structure will be swallowed by magma, and somewhere else on the planet, a new, deepest point will open. But going down there, as you have already guessed, is not so simple. The main enemy is pressure. You have felt how your ears pop in a swimming pool at a depth of 3 to 4 meters, right? Now imagine you are 10 kilometers down. The pressure here is more than 1,000 atmospheres. That is like a ton of weight on your fingernail. Yes, exactly as if you placed a small car on your nail. At such pressure, even the strongest materials begin to suffer, sometimes epically. In 2014, for example, the submersible Nereus, lowered into the Kermadec Trench, exploded underwater. It simply shattered into pieces, not because it was poorly made, but because depth does not joke. And now guess what depth military submarines can safely reach? Only up to 1,500 meters. Yes, Titanics and nuclear boats are no stroll to Challenger Deep. So, 1960. While some were launching rockets into the sky, two brave men decided to do the opposite, to dive to Earth's very bottom. U.S. Navy officer Don Walsh and Swiss scientist, oceanographer Jacques Piccard. Heroes who dared to do what no one before them had done. Not a single person, ever. They descended in a bathyscaphe with the poetic name Trieste. Imagine something like a giant bomb on a cable with a spherical capsule at the bottom that you climb into, and forget how to get out. There were no panoramic windows, no coffee maker, not even room to stand up straight. Only 2 tiny portholes, 5 centimeters in diameter, like a peephole in a door. And all this to head into a realm of darkness, pressure, and the unknown. At a depth of 9 kilometers, there was a sudden deafening bang. Picture it. You are in a small capsule, 9 kilometers of water below you, and 9 above, and suddenly something explodes. Any normal person in Walsh and Pickard's place would have said, "Hey, looks like it's time to turn around." But no. Our guys simply continued the descent. Later it turned out that one of the outer protective plexiglass blocks had cracked, which, by the way, was supposed to protect them from instant death. A great day, isn't it? After almost 5 hours, they reached the bottom. Just think, 5 hours of free fall in a sealed sphere. No music, no internet, not even a toilet. And there they were, at the bottom of the Mariana Trench. The real thing. What did they see there? Well, first of all, nothing. The sediment stirred up by their arrival completely obscured the view. But when the water settled, they saw something alive. Perhaps it was a flat fish, slowly gliding along the bottom. Later specialists suggested it was most likely a sea cucumber. Not exactly a creature to give you goosebumps, but still, life. At a depth of almost 11 kilometers. They spent only 20 minutes on the bottom, and then began an ascent no less long and slow, which took 3 hours. It was so risky that for half a century no one else dared to repeat that feat. In that time, nearly 7,000 people managed to climb the summit of Everest, and 12 flew to the moon. But to the bottom of the Mariana Trench, no one. Only in 2012 did a new explorer dare to descend into this realm of darkness and pressure. The famous film director James Cameron. Yes, the same one who made Titanic and Avatar. Only this time he had no blue people with bows. Just himself, the submersible deep-sea Challenger, and the abyss. It was the first solo dive in history to Challenger deep. Since then, about 20 dives have been made to this point, and the number of people who have been there has finally exceeded those who have been to the moon. In 2021, businessman and traveler Hamish Harding made the longest and deepest dive in Challenger deep. 2 years later, he became one of the victims of the tragedy involving the submersible Titan, which collapsed at a depth of only 3,800 meters when a group was exploring the wreck of the Titanic. Yes, you heard right, only 3.8 kilometers, and Challenger deep is almost 11. The depths do not forgive mistakes, and they certainly do not forgive arrogance. Amusingly, above all this drama, there is nothing to see. The surface of the ocean at this point is absolutely empty. No land, no landmarks, more than 300 kilometers in all directions, and only water. And when you sink beneath it, everything suddenly becomes calm. Just a couple of meters, and there are no waves, no pitching. Everything goes quiet. You are enveloped by light, a lot of light. This is the epipelagic zone, or as scientists call it, the euphotic. Only 2 to 3% of the volume of the world ocean, but this is where the magic happens. Photosynthesis. We remain for now in the epipelagic zone, the very top layer of the ocean, down to a depth of about 200 meters. Here sunlight can still penetrate the water column, and that is enough to power the planet's main biological engine. Photosynthesis. Phytoplankton, tiny algae and bacteria, are like little solar panels. They absorb carbon dioxide, turn it into organic matter, and generously release oxygen into the water and air. For the record, half of all the oxygen you are breathing right now comes not from the forest, but from the ocean. Yes, our breathing depends on these microscopic hard workers. Then comes zooplankton, which eats phytoplankton. It gets eaten by little fish. The little fish are eaten by bigger fish, those by even bigger ones, and so on, until a shark appears, or a whale, or you opening a can of tuna. In short, the entire food chain begins here, in this thin layer of sunlit water. This is where those very fish live that end up on our plates. Tuna, herring, cod, they all inhabit this layer of life. But now we go deeper, below 200 meters, and the sun slowly loses its power. The water becomes blue, then dark blue, and then almost black. Welcome to the mesopelagic zone, also called the twilight zone. There is still a little light here, but not enough for photosynthesis. It is truly cool now, and in place of solar shine comes bioluminescence. Yes, here, fish, shrimp, squid, and other creatures light themselves up. They are like a Christmas garland, but smart. Light is used for a reason. Some attract partners, some camouflage, some hunt, and some simply put on a little light show. Well, just because they can. Interestingly, scientists estimate that the biomass of fish in this zone may be greater than in all other parts of the ocean combined. Just think about it. And we cannot even imagine how much life is boiling beneath the surface, simply because we do not see it. Here in the half-light lives the most numerous vertebrate on the planet, the bristle mouth, a small fish with a toothy grin, only 7 to 8 centimeters long, but in numbers, possibly quadrillions. Yes, that is not a typo. It may be the most widespread creature with a backbone on Earth, and it lives in total darkness. How do they survive? They feed on the same zooplankton as everyone else, only they do it in complete darkness. They are like little guardians of the twilight, not drawing attention. The deeper we go, the darker it gets. And at last even the final glimmer of blue disappears. Now, only absolute darkness. We are at a depth of 1 kilometer. Here begins the bathypelagic zone, or more simply the midnight zone. This is the most extensive and at the same time the most unexplored biome on the entire planet. It covers more than half of Earth's surface, but we know almost nothing about it. The temperature here constantly hovers around plus 4 degrees Celsius. Pressure? Already simply monstrous. We long ago passed the depth accessible to divers, even in suits. Submarines? Forget it. Not a single sub will descend here. But here is what matters. For the locals, all this is normal. They do not feel the pressure. They live in the dark the way we live in daylight, and that is because their bodies are made precisely for this world. Our cameras illuminate a true blizzard of microscopic particles, a snow of organics drifting down from above. There is still a lot of motion here for now. There are things to eat, but the deeper we go, the greater the silence. Truly strange beings appear here. Some of them have enormous eyes, more like astronomical telescopes, like the owlfish, for example, which hunts shrimp and jellyfish by catching the faintest glimmers of light. Others, like the barrel eye, have eyes that look upward, straight through the skull. Yes, its head is almost transparent, and through it you can peek right into the brain. A kind of brain-seeing hunter. And some fish have almost lost their sight entirely, like the sniper eel with tiny eyes. Well, why bother if everything is black anyway? But not everything here is blind. Some inhabitants, on the contrary, use light as a weapon, and the main gangster in this zone is the anglerfish. It is like a cunning fisherman with bait, A glowing ball dangles in front of its nose, and as soon as someone believes it is a free lunch, bam, the toothy maw snaps shut. No chance. Deeper and deeper, and we see life forms becoming ever stranger and more massive. Here in the darkness, a law reigns. Size matters. This phenomenon even has a name: deep-sea gigantism. Why are animals so big here? There's a whole bouquet of reasons. First, the bigger you are, the harder you are to eat. It is like in school. The big kids were less often targets. Second, large animals can eat both small prey and larger victims. They have, so to speak, more options on the menu. And since food in these depths is very rare, it is better to be ready for any order. Besides, big creatures have a slow metabolism, which means they can go a long time without eating, simply drifting while they wait for a lucky moment. And if it does come, oh, the prey is out of luck. But reality, creatures up to 13 meters long that almost no one has seen alive, and you know what? They are probably even bigger sometimes. Why not? Their eyes are the largest on Earth, up to 30 centimeters in diameter. That is like a soccer ball in your head. Why so huge? To see in the pitch black the silhouettes of enemies and prey, especially if you are hunting or, on the contrary, hiding from a sperm whale. The only known enemy of the giant squid. Many locals are true masters of deception. Some, like the anglerfish, lure prey with light. But there are others. For example, the pelican eel, a creature that looks as if it was designed by a student in the first week of studying biology. It has a huge mouth and a stretching stomach. It can swallow prey larger than itself. The strategy is simple. If something appears nearby, swallow it. Do not think. Do not risk missing your only chance. It looks ridiculous, but it works. And the lancetfish is not funny at all. It is a 2-meter-long predator with sharp teeth, built solely for hunting and devouring. It is not interested in glowing toys. It simply waits, silently, in the dark. We cross a boundary beyond which night becomes eternal, and life, an exception rather than the rule. Welcome to the Hadal Zone, named after Hades, the ancient Greek god of the underworld. Depth, from 6 to 11 kilometers. Pressure, here it is like loans, huge and everywhere, but the temperature is always around 0. Powerful underwater currents of cold water from Antarctica flow along the bottom here like lazy, icy rivers. And these currents are vital. Do you know why? Because they carry oxygen, without which even the most adapted cell, they cannot cope. It is this flow that makes life possible in such hellish conditions. Even at a depth of 8 kilometers, the bottom is covered with a soft layer of silt. It is stirred up by detritivores, organisms tirelessly crawling around in search of any kind of food. Above the silt, where rocks rise, you can see patches of microbial slime. Yes, actual plantations of microbes feeding on hydrogen that bursts from underwater volcanoes and cracks. And here, the real magic begins. These microbes use not sunlight but chemistry, a process called chemosynthesis. They feed on the energy of chemical reactions, creating organic matter as if you were cooking dinner out of lightning and sulfur. It turns out that even in total darkness, life finds a way, and where microbes appear, there appears someone who eats the microbes. The deepest fish ever recorded by scientists is the Pseudolaparis, resembling a translucent tadpole with a perpetually surprised face. It has no scales, and its bones are soft and fragile, like jelly. If you somehow brought it to the surface, it would simply dissolve before your eyes. How can one live under such conditions at all? The answer lies in unique biological adaptations. The cell membranes of these fish are arranged differently so as not to be destroyed by pressure. They have special proteins that stabilize DNA. Some do not even have ordinary vision. Since there is no light here at all, why have eyes? Most incredible of all, we know almost nothing about how these organisms interact with each other, how they reproduce, hunt, and defend themselves. All we have are blurry shots from deep-sea cameras and rare samples raised from the depths with special equipment. And perhaps we are only scratching the surface of what the oceanic abyss hides. At these same depths, you sometimes encounter creatures that break our usual ideas about the size of life. For example, xenophyophora, single-celled organisms that reach the size of an orange. Think about it, one cell, and it is bigger than your fist. These beings consist mostly of a soft, slime-like substance and at the same time create bizarre structures around themselves from sand, shell fragments, and even metal particles. Scientists still do not understand why such creatures need such sizes. Perhaps it is related to absorbing nutrient particles from the water. The larger the surface, the more efficient. Or maybe this is an ancient form of life that evolution simply did not touch. Their strangeness is so great that some specialists suspect that such life forms may be found on other worlds, in the oceans of icy moons, like Europa or Enceladus. As of today, the deep sea zone remains one of the most unexplored places on the planet. According to scientists, less than 20% of the ocean floor has been thoroughly studied, and that is despite the ocean covering more than 70% of Earth's surface. Why so? It all comes down to technical and financial constraints. Exploring the depths of the ocean is significantly harder than sending a satellite into space. Pressure, darkness, cold, the difficulty of navigation, and the lack of signal make the task extremely hard. Even the most modern craft barely withstand the extreme conditions at depths greater than 10 kilometers. On top of that, such expeditions cost millions of dollars and require highly qualified specialists. And in return, we get only short video clips, fragments of DNA, and scattered data. Nevertheless, progress continues. New methods, such as genetic sequencing of water, environmental DNA, and autonomous deep-sea drones, make it possible to collect information even without physical contact with organisms. Scientists are already finding dozens of new species on each such expedition, and this is only the beginning. It may turn out that the abyss hides life forms we do not even suspect. Bioluminescent predators, giant invertebrates, unknown viruses and microbes capable of surviving under conditions incompatible with life on the surface. And who knows, perhaps the real revolution in biology will begin not on Mars or the Moon, but right under our feet, in the darkness and cold of the depths, where eternal silence reigns and pressure can crush a submarine. And what amazed you the most? And do you have any thoughts about it? Write comments and watch our previous episodes. They are even more interesting than what you have just seen. Thank you for watching.